Good morning, Rob. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm super excited to have you in the show because I got exposed into your world a couple years ago in my journey of building this podcast and the whole marketing automation. And you've got a pretty solid staple product out there in the market. But before we really dive into it, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of a backdrop of, how did you dive into becoming an entrepreneur, and what was the event that happened where you decided that it was time to jump in with both feet?
Yeah, entrepreneurship has always kind of called me, even from when I was young. I grew up solidly in a blue collar family, and in order to have enough money to buy batteries or comic books or stuff that I quote unquote needed back in the day, I had to make money. And the jobs I lived out in the country, and it was like mowing lawns and raking leaves was not an option because we lived miles from everybody. So I learned to buy things and mark them up and sell them at school. And by the time I was in, let's say, 8th grade, I was making between $50 and $100 a month just doing that, just as a middleman. And it was a big deal. It was kind of life-changing for me to realize, all right, this is the kind of thing I want to do. So when I got older, I got out of college, and I took job after job, and I realized that I'm kind of unemployable. Like, I'm everybody's worst employee, not because I'm not good. The problem is I'm quite good at what I do, but I'm also always unhappy with, the way things are going, unless I'm kind of driving the ship. And so that was when I realized I need to do my own thing. I need to use my creativity to build interesting things and try to make a living for myself.
Well, it's interesting too. So professionally unemployable, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
So it's interesting how you're in the software development and coding space is where you started. So how did you go from the blue collar family into the world that you're in right now?
Yeah, my parents, from the time I was young, it was just an expectation that I would go to college. No one in my family before me had been. So I was the second person. It was my older brother, who's 4 years older than me, and myself were the only two that graduated from college. But in our family, it was an expectation. And so wound up going to school, and I was already, with that in mind, I was writing code for fun, kind of building text-based games and stuff when I was 8. My brother and I got an Apple IIe. This is the early 80s. And my parents just said, here's this computer. We don't really understand it, but we're sure you'll figure it out. And it was a crap load of money. I think they spent $4,000 in 1980s dollars for an electrician, and a homemaker. Like, my parents really invested in us, and I have a lot of gratitude for that. They set us up to succeed,
That's pretty sweet. So, after you're starting to learn how to code and everything like that, you go to college, what was the first business that you decided to jump into, and then how did it all come to fruition?
After college, man, I launched a bunch of really dumb businesses that were like trying to, because I knew web development by this time, and this was the late 90s, early 2000s, and I launched a bunch of stupid things that never took off. The one that really started getting traction was took me about 5 years, and I finally realized, if I'm going to do this without raising funding, and I just want to have a small business that generates even $1,000, $2,000 a month, just to prove that it can be done, I need to build a real niche product that doesn't have a ton of competition, and it needs to solve a real pain point. And so I started working on a few ideas, and then there was this software that I found on a forum that was actually for sale. The guys wanted to kind of exit the business, and it was called DotnetInvoice. And it's this super niche invoicing software built in this technology, Microsoft's technology, .NET. And I happen to know .NET. And so I bought it from them. It was barely doing any revenue. It was doing maybe $500 a month. And I acquired it from them for $11,000, which was it was all the money I had. That was like, kind of my business's life savings. And that was the first time I took that business up to about between $3,000 and $5,000 a month. And that was like life-changing for me, not even in the revenue it generated, but in the mindset shift of like, whoa, this is totally possible. And if I did this once or twice more, and I had a few of these, I could stop consulting and stop, working for anyone. It would pay for my life.
That's fantastic. So you got the snowball effect. And, when go back to the comment that you said about without raising funding, and you're very, very adamant about that because you've also got a book that's surrounding not raising funding. So when you're looking at businesses, where does that come from about how you approach the financing of building these businesses?
Yeah, I kind of discovered this process, and I'm retroactively, I've named it the stair-step approach to bootstrapping. And what I realized is that I didn't want to well, A, I didn't have the credentials to raise funding. I didn't want to move to the Bay Area or Boston or, Seattle. I mean, there were only a few places, especially in the early 2000s, that you could go to raise funding. I didn't want to uproot my family. I didn't want to work the 90-hour weeks. I didn't want to lose control and get fired by my board like a lot of people. There's all these drawbacks to it.
Yep.
And maybe in my naivete, I said, I can do this without that. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was, I took a small amount of money and then I built DotnetInvoice. I took the profit from that because I was still working full time, right? But at $3,000 to $5,000 a month, I was socking away in a bank account. I used that then to launch my next thing. And then I used the profit from that to buy my next thing, which was a SaaS app called Hittail in 2011. And then I used all the profit from Hittail to start Drip, which is probably why I'm on the show today, because I've actually exited Hittail and Drip in the past few years. But for me, it was a parlay. It was one thing to the next because I didn't have, $250,000 or $500,000 in venture funding, and I didn't have family money, and I didn't have any of that. All I had was the software development skills and the kind of the entrepreneurial drive to build something.
Well, and it's interesting because you said it's the control factor, right? When you're bringing in money and you are, signing up with another partner, it's marriage, and it's no longer your creation to be able to do it. So I'm curious, as you've been very specific and intentional with some of these things. So when you say that the stair-step approach makes a lot of sense because you're going from one company and the cash flow to another, maybe before we get into the whole journey of the Drip and the Hittail and stuff, where's the ultimate goal? Like, what is the top of the stairs for you? Is there a certain area that you're going or a certain thing that you want that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. For me, the entire time, it was three things. It was freedom, purpose, and relationships. All right. And the freedom was the freedom to own my own time and to build what I want and work on what I want and not have to answer to a boss. Purpose was to do things that were interesting to me. Because if I could just sharpen pencils 8 hours a day and make $150K, I would have no purpose, right? It would be super boring. So I wanted to work on interesting things. And then relationships is just that I always want to work with people that I enjoy, and I want to maintain family relationships, meaning I don't want to push any business so hard that it erodes my connection with I have 3 kids, I have a wife. And so those were the 3 things I was always seeking. And what I realized is I had a few small software products that were providing a full-time income for me, and this was in California. So it was between 100 and 150K a year. And I was barely working. I was working like 12-hour weeks. And it was fantastic for about 10 months. I had freedom and I had relationships, but I didn't really have a purpose. And so that was when I realized, all right, I need all 3 of these things in order to maintain, happiness.
I was just going to ask, so how you got to that. So where were you? Because the whole thing that's been pushed down everybody's throats these days is the 4-hour work week. And so how did you, were you sitting somewhere where you were just like, I'm super bored, or how did you get to that point where you realized that your purpose was missing?
Yeah, So I read the 4-Hour Workweek in 2007 when it came out, and I already had these software products, but I was also consulting. And I thought, if I could just work 1 or 2 days a week, my life would be great. And I was right to a point. So in 2010, by the time it was 2010, a couple years later, I had enough software products where, like I said, I wasn't working very much. We had our second child, and I hung out with him for almost 10 months, 8 to 10 months. And I would just walk around town. I would meet friends. I was like a stay-at-home dad, but I was making a full-time income in these products. And it was fantastic. And I have such fond memories. You can never get that time back, right? Of all that time he and I hung out together. By the end of that 8 to 10 months, I was really chomping at the bit. And I realized that when I wasn't creating things, that I would slowly kind of wither, and I became unhappy. I started, very mild, not depression, but I felt myself just unmotivated and really lethargic. And I was kind of like, I need to snap out of this, and I need to take another challenge to get that purpose back.
So what was the process? Because that obviously probably led into the Drip phase. So what was the way that what process, or were there resources or something to help you find where your purpose was? I mean, because I think that's a big challenge that a lot of people have going, okay, so this is great, but how do you actually go? What is the process that you go to actually find that purpose?
Yeah. So there's a couple things I did. One is a skill I learned from my wife, Sherry, who you've interviewed on the show. She would go on these annual retreats where she would go off the grid, away from me and the kids for 48 to 72 hours, and go to the beach or the mountains or just somewhere far away and disconnect, and leave her computer at home. And she would read and think and sketch, and she brought butcher paper. And it was this question of, what brings me life, what brought me life over the last year, what did I not enjoy, what do I want to do more of, what do I want to do less of, what does the next year look like? And it's this time when you just let your mind open up. And it typically takes 12 hours before I can even like get some good thought done, because my mind still races with thoughts of work and schedule and kids and et cetera, et cetera. But once you get in that mindset, you can really, you can gain some self-knowledge, and really start understanding where you are and where you want to head. So that's what I did. I was doing those twice a year. And at certain pivot points, it really helped kind of shift my focus. And at the end of this 10-month stint with my child, I went on a retreat, and I wrote things down like I need to do something bigger. I need to be more ambitious. I need to make a difference. I need to create things. It was all these notes of like, this is what's going to change how I feel. And sure enough, I was right for the time being. These things for me tend to go in about 18 to 24 month cycles where I go. And then by the end of it, I'm like, whew, and now I'm done with that. On to the next thing.
So after you're done with that retreat, is that when you decided to start the drip company?
That actually was when I bought Hittail.
Okay.
So I acquired, I was going to either build or buy something, right? I can do either. And I started breaking ground on code, and it's just such an arduous process to build something from scratch. And I knew it was going to be probably 12 to 18 months before I had launched it and found product market fit, which is where you have something that people actually want to pay for. It's just a lot of iteration to do that. And so I was doing that while in the back of my mind, I was thinking, if something came along that I could acquire, because I had acquired several things before that, I was thinking I would do that, because it basically, for whatever it is, 20, 30 grand or 50, whatever you buy it for, it'll leap you ahead 18 months. Yep. And I was interested in getting there. So I was doing some cold email outreach to some old SaaS apps that I had known about. I was looking on forums. I was looking on Flippa. I was just kind of looking around. And one of the cold emails I sent was to the owner of Hittail.com, and it was just a decaying business, and no one was paying attention to it. At one point, it had been in like Inc. magazine and Forbes and the New York Times. I mean, all these people had written about it, and it was like one of the top 10 apps of 2007 coming out of New York. And then it had just kind of, gone off the radar. No one was maintaining it. So I was able to purchase it for, I think it was $30,000. Which again, in the parlay, like I said earlier, I had about 50 grand in my business bank account by that time. And so I wrote most of it to buy that, and I spent the other 20 to rehab it. I had to hire a designer. I had to move servers and some other stuff. So this was a pretty big gamble for me. This was 2011.
So what when you're, because I'm interested in like as your mindset going into the Hittail.com and Drip, because that's even further down the road, is how was your mindset different when you got these three things that you're trying to hit: the freedom, purpose, and relationships? How do you look at a business like that? So like when you go in there and you're buying it, what is the ultimate goal? Were you starting with the end in mind? Did you have certain milestones or certain things that you were trying to do with the business?
Yeah, there was. I wanted to gather more. So I already had freedom in relationships, right? I was kind of chilling. I had a full-time income, and I was doing fine with the relationships. The purpose is what I was missing, and the business was such a challenge. So another thing I learned about myself. You asked me earlier, how do you think about what to do next? I've taken several of these kind of personality tests, which Sherry, my wife's a psychologist. She kind of rolls her eyes at some of them, but I love finding out stuff about myself that I kind of knew subconsciously, but I maybe didn't know on the surface. And I took StrengthsFinder. I've taken the Enneagram. I have it on my list to take the Colby A, but all three of these can kind of help you do stuff. And StrengthsFinder told me I'm a learner and I'm a maximizer. Okay. And a learner is where you are unhappy unless you're learning new things and being challenged by new things, which I was not at the time. And I'm a maximizer. It says you love taking things that are good and making them great. And you don't necessarily like, taking things that are really crappy and making them good. And so that's what Hittail was. Hittail was this good app at one point, and it was just flailing. At one point it had peaked at $5,000 a month in MRR, and it was now doing, I forget, it was like 1,500 when I acquired it. So it was really just decaying. And I saw the potential in it, though. It had tons of inbound links. It had a really good, like a loyal customer base, even though it wasn't large. And I thought, I can maximize this thing. And so that kind of lined up with who I understood myself to be and what potentially would make me happy by, redesigning this app, rehabbing it, and then the goal was to like 10x or 20x the revenue to a point where it would have a meaningful impact on our lives. That was my personal challenge. Was can I, right now I make at the time I make a full-time living, low six figures, whatever, but can I double or triple my income over the next couple years? And not for the money, but for the freedom and the challenge is why I wanted it.
So over the course of the handful of years that you own that, what were some of the major milestones? And, in your feedback loop, were you hitting the milestones that you wanted to?
Yeah, I was being pretty ambitious, and my two milestones were I wanted to learn as much as I could about new marketing approaches because things are changing so quickly. And I gobbled up all these resources on Facebook ads, which were just coming to fruition then, on the new side of SEO, because I'd been doing a bunch of search engine optimization. Like there were a bunch of technical marketing skills I wanted to learn. And all of those, it was amazing. Like it grew fast and I got to learn, which is like my two favorite things in the world. In addition, I had loose revenue milestones, and I think I 10x'd it within 15 months maybe. So it got up to about 15,000 MR, from 1,500 to 15,000. And that was a great milestone because I was able to then hire help, which I really had only hired virtual assistants before because I never had the budget. But that allowed me to kind of hire someone local. And then I eventually, grew it up to between 25 and 30,000 MRR. And I was very proud of that. It was less about, I look at this money. It was more like, I accomplished what I set out to do, and I had purpose. I was really happy.
So at what point, what triggering event within Hittail then, did you start finding that your purpose was no longer there, or was there a triggering event that said, okay, I do want to sell this and I'm now bored, or, how did that transition period happen?
Yeah, it was both. Well, it was two things. One was I did start getting a little bored, and my expiration date tends to be about 18 to 24 months working on the same project. And then I kind of just lose interest. And so since Hittail is monthly subscription, it had recurring revenue, and I kind of brought in help to help try to run it. Didn't work that well over time. It gradually decayed back to, I can't remember what it was when I sold it, but it was in the teens probably in revenue. And that was, I think I sold it in 2015. So I kept it for several years. The other reason I wanted to sell it is Google kept screwing around with its algorithm and with the way it sourced keywords, and it kept breaking Hittail. And it made me realize, I started asking myself, is this a business I want to own for 10 years? Like in a decade, is Hittail still going to be a solvent, viable business? And when the answer was, I'm not sure, because Google keeps accidentally breaking it, it made me think I want to build probably a business that's more a long-term business. And that's when the idea for Drip came out of a problem we had with Hittail.
Well, that's beautiful because it's a good segue in, because you and I were talking before we got on the show about the Value Builder system, which is John Warlow's book Built to Sell, and some of the philosophies behind there. So I just super curious because I love how you've got this sequence of the evolving philosophy on business. So how did Drip, and what did you learn from Hittail and the sustainability of that, and how did the whole Drip idea come out, and kind of walk us through the origination of that?
Sure. I mean, as I started looking at Hittail, and I thought it's a great little business. It was a great step on my stair step, kind of up the chain. But I'm not learning much anymore, so I've kind of lost that purpose. The revenue kind of flattened, and it was like I could build more features and try to level up, but it was like I feel like I want a bigger challenge and a longer term thing. And so the thing in my head had been a lot of I want to 10x. I want to go from my little business is doing $3,000, and I thought, boy, if I could build a business that's doing $30,000 a month, that would be fascinating. And I did. And so my next thing was I want to build a business that's doing $300,000 a month, just to pick a number, right? But I want to build something that's a multi-million-dollar annual recurring revenue, and Hittail's never going to do that. Just because of the way it's structured and the audience it serves. And so I made some notes and I said, look, I want to build a business, a 7-figure business. I want it, the price point to be a lot higher, so churn is lower. I want to serve real businesses that are, have their own revenue. And I want it in a space where I can't get killed by Google, or Facebook or Twitter, where it's not I'm not relying on a third party. And so as I'm thinking that through, we had an issue with Hittail where we had a lot of traffic, but we were not getting as many email subscribers as I would like. So I worked with a contractor, his name's Derek, and I said, look, can we do a little JavaScript pop-up widget in the bottom right-hand corner of every page of Hittail where we just collect email addresses, and then we send them into MailChimp, and we do an autoresponder sequence to educate them and upsell Hittail. And we did, and it had like a 30% impact, a 30% lift on our visitor to trial numbers. And I was like, this is game changing. But it took Derek, who's a super sharp guy, took him like a week to build it, week and a half. And I thought to myself, this is insane, because that was not that big of a deal. And so that was the initiation or initial thought of like, well, Derek, why don't I hire you to just build that into its own application where with one line of JavaScript, anyone can get that functionality. And so I got the domain name and picked the name Drip, and Derek started cranking away on it.
And the genesis of Drip started.
That's right. That was it.
So, what was you do? Obviously, had some overlap from when you sold Hittail and then when you developed and when you actually formed Drip and started working on that full time.
That's right. So I was basically taking all the net profit from Hittail, feeding it into Drip, because as Derek and myself, I was paying us. And Derek then became a W-2 employee. Derek later became my co-founder in essence, kind of retroactively, because he had put so much into it and he was so valuable that I felt like, we both felt like he deserved some equity. And then there were server costs and there was all types of stuff. So yeah, I was parlaying one thing to the next. So obviously
I can feel the fact that you found your purpose and how you find your flow, which we've talked about, the zone and making sure that you're happy because you got your freedom financially as you've been building all these, you got the relationships that you've been forming, and you've kind of found your niche the purpose, right? So how, when you're looking at Drip and what you were developing then, did you look at the business going, okay, so because you wrote your notes down of 7-figure, all these different things that you wanted the business to be. So how did you plan ahead of what you were trying to do with Drip? It's because that's a different kind of model based on the other businesses that you had owned because of the fact that of those criteria that you wrote down. So how did you go forward with the different thoughts?
Yeah, in all honesty, I had planned for Drip and to be another lifestyle business. And I thought, boy, it'd be great. Yeah, I really did. I was not trying to take over the world with it. That just didn't, because, it's interesting. Again, personality test stuff like the Enneagram, I'm a creative or a maker. I'm like an artist when I come to it, which is interesting, right? Because I'm left brain, I'm a coder, but I've always been more enthralled with the idea of making things than the achievement, right? It's like it's a different skill set or a different desire. I don't want to achieve just for achievement's sake. I want to achieve while I'm making things. So I've been in bands, I write songs, I'm always like making. And so I really looked at it as like, let's build this interesting tool and it'll be great. I do have these goals of revenue, but I don't particularly want to work 70-hour weeks or grow this to a 50-person team where I'm managing people or where we are forced to raise funding or where, all these things. I'm not anti-funding, by the way. I realize I've been negative on it. I'm an angel investor now. I have a dozen angel investments. I have friends who take funding, but it wasn't something I personally wanted to do. And yeah, so that's how I was thinking about it, was to make a lifestyle business. But once we launched it, there was we got a decent amount of uptick, and I think it was doing about $8 to $10,000 a month, which was great from the launch, right from the start, for two dudes in a closet, basically, working on my porch, But the problem is we were churning out. We really didn't have product market fit, and we had like advanced users using us who I respected. They kept giving us feedback of like, just build in the way to do automation, just build in a way to do these more advanced features. And once we did that, it was almost like grabbing onto a rocket ship where it's like, I have to hire people and we have to get an office because we're now growing $3 to $5,000 a month. I used to have entire businesses that did that, and it was just like just to staff support and to keep the servers going and to keep the features going. It was like it was exhilarating, but it definitely wasn't where I had originally planned to take it.
Well, obviously you found a niche and a need and a problem that you were solving if people were gravitating that fast. And at that point, so as far as like the timelines for the listeners, because, Drip competes with, Infusionsoft or HubSpot or Marketo or ActiveCampaign, all these tools that came around. And were you a little bit before those? Because a lot of those other people had tons of VC backing, right? So I find it interesting about how you snuck in and then what you did. So where was everybody else in the same line for the kind of the marketplace?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point because we launched in 2013, and at the time, ActiveCampaign was still like a white label downloadable software. They weren't SaaS yet. Infusionsoft was the 900-pound gorilla or 800-pound gorilla in the room. Like everybody knew about Infusionsoft in kind of the small business space. HubSpot 5 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive, so more in the mid-market or enterprise space. But Infusionsoft and Entreport were the two that were really duking it out. And we came in and we were like an easier to use Infusionsoft. We were less expensive and way simpler and really built from the ground up. Without a lot of legacy, right? Because Infusionsoft had been around since, I think it's like 2006 or 7. So their code base is a little crufty. And again, I have respect for all these companies. I'm not talking smack because they're competitors, but it's just, it's the facts of the situation. And so we were able to swoop in and really, with a new code base, we're able to move really fast and kind of start taking their market share. And so we actually were taking people kind of pulling down from Infusionsoft and Entreport and then pulling up from MailChimp and Aweber, right? They were very simple tools and they don't have the automation. And so that was like 2014 and 2015 were these years of just hyper growth for us, like I had never experienced, especially with no funding. And that was one of the challenges was when you're growing that quickly, and the $3,000 to $5,000 a month was the early growth. It got faster the more, and so when you're growing that quickly, it's hard to have enough cash in the bank just to keep things solvent.
So how did you end up going through that process as you're looking, okay, as that rocket ship starts going up and you're realizing that this is no longer just a lifestyle business where you're going to be walking your kid down the road and you've got like a full-time enterprise that you're running. How did you financially back that? I mean, were you just self-funding it? Or how did that work? Because you had mentioned previously that you were, obviously you got forced into a little bit of other things because of how substantial you were growing.
Right. Yeah. I was self-funding it out of Hittail revenue. I was pulling off of Drip's revenue. It's nice to have a subscription business where people pay you in advance, right? And then Derek and I, by this time, were essentially co-founders making the decisions, and we were seriously evaluating a round of angel funding. Because at the time, with the growth and the level we were at, raising a $500,000 round at a pretty nice valuation would not have been hard. And so we were constantly struggling with that. We were making ends meet. We never missed payroll. The servers were always up, but I was stressed the whole time, right? It was like you're on the edge where we'd grow by 10K of monthly recurring revenue. And I'd be like, all right, that's enough to hire another developer. Let's go. So it was always right at the edge,
Yep.
And that is what led us to really start seriously considering angel funding. And during that time, we started being approached by potential acquirers.
Well, I was going to say, because when you're getting to the point that you're at, you're probably your mindset starts to shift about what is the longevity of this business. And so when you had mentioned that you had this criteria of this next business that you wanted, one was longevity, and you're starting to think about angel investors and these different things, where was your head at, and where did you where was the vision and the future of Drip in your head, and how did that change as you were having some of these conversations?
It's a really good question. I mean, we had gone from just being nothing to being one of the top 12 marketing automation providers in the world, according to DotnetInvoice, which is a market share analysis platform. And it was at that time, it was 5 people in basically a big closet in Fresno, and people were emailing us like, "How are you guys doing this?" It was such a surprise. And so the thought there was, look, Derek and I would talk, and I'd say, look, we could raise a round of angel investment, and then that puts us in here for another 3 to 5 years of doing the grind, and to call it affectionately. I mean, running a business day to day and scrambling like that is as much exhilaration and purpose as you get from it. It can also be tough, mentally. Yep. Or, we do have these acquirers starting to poke at us a little bit and say, hey, have you, it's starting to feel us out. And it's like, should I even return their emails? Because prior I had not, right? I just, no, not interested. And that's when we decided, look, we could at least pull those strings, pull the threads, and see where they go, and if they don't wind up, then there's not much time wasted. But if they do wind up being something, this could be potentially a life-changing outcome for us in a shorter time frame. We could still be involved in the business, which we are today. Both Derek and I still work full-time on Drip, and maybe we could, take some money off the table for us without having to, again, raise a round and then wait 3 to 5 years for something else to happen, So how, when you're getting these inquiries, and I'm curious about the process that you went through as you started answering them, but, you going back to when you're on that retreat and you were very purposeful with the 3 different things, how were you calibrating what was important to you versus getting caught up in the hype of what you had been building and making sure that you didn't make the wrong decision? What was the process that you're going through? Yeah, it was a lot of thinking over a long term. So there was nothing impulsive about it. It was never, I woke up and said, I'm going to sell this business. It was more like Derek and I having one conversation a week. Hey, do we need to raise funding? Are we doing, or do we do nothing? Do we just keep growing it the way we are? Do we slow down growth to have the cash flow meet? Do we sell? And it was this 6-month mulling over, of he and I, and then I would do it with Sherry, who's a really good sounding board. I'm in a mastermind group. I would do it with those guys. And I would also just go on these retreats, as I said. And every time it was coming back to, what is it that I want long-term? Will this give me freedom, purpose, and relationships? And are we at the point where we would even evaluate, an exit? Because when you're growing like that, it's a struggle of like, well, if I sell now, am I leaving money on the table? Should we just not pull the threads yet? Can we get back to them in 6 months? Because again, we were growing so fast, it's like we could almost double the value of the business in a certain amount of time, as long as it doesn't top out, right? Because if the growth stops, then suddenly you're negotiating based on net profit rather than revenue multiples. So it was tough. It was not clear cut. I mean, to answer your question, it was not like it came out. It was just mulling it over and thinking.
What was some of the best advice that you got during that process?
During the decision to sell, or even to raise or to stay, the advice I got was probably from Sherry, who talked about. She kept saying, where do you want to be in 2 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Right, and do you still want to be working on drip? Think out further than just the short term. I got a lot of good advice once we got into acquisition talks. That's when I talked to other founders who had been acquired, because it was more of a tactical thing, right? What should I do here? How should I think about this? But I struggled with the decision to consider selling, with no price in mind, or having never talked to anyone, gone through a big acquisition like this. I found that an extremely personal decision. And so I didn't actually talk to many other founders, which maybe I should have.
And what were the questions or the thoughts going through your head as that personal decision was being made?
It was things like, do I still want to be working on this in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is this something that really excites me, that I think I have longevity on? It was a question of, I'm stressed now. Is it going to get better or worse? Or is it going to stay the same? It was, do I want to grow? Because by the time we got acquired, it was 8 full-time and 2 contractors, so about 10 people. And I kept asking myself, do I want to run a 30 or 40-person company? Is that something that I will enjoy? So those are the types of things I was mulling over.
So then that as you kind of have a little bit more clarity on those different decisions, you start pulling these threads and answering the emails to the acquirers. What was the process, and who was reaching out to you, and kind of explain how you started setting up those meetings and the conversations that you were having?
Yeah, it was, so there were 5 different inbound companies within, I think it was about over 18 months. And frankly, most of them went nowhere, as I think is apt to happen. But each time I did it, each time I responded and said, hey, yeah, I might be interested in talking. And then we'd do a phone call, and then I'd find out, they're kind of looking just to acquire the team, right? They're looking for an acqui-hire, and that's not something we were going to do. Or there was kind of a private equity firm that I could tell was just really going to be all about dollars and cents. And that also was not something I was super interested in. And then, a couple of them didn't go anywhere, but then there were actually 2 that were pretty interesting. And the acquirer that eventually bought us is a company called Leadpages here in Minneapolis. And that one, the reason that really caught my eye and that I followed up pretty heavily with it is I knew Leadpages. I knew they had the funding they had raised. And I also, the CEO of Leadpages and I had crossed paths in the past. I'd interviewed on my podcast, and we kind of lived in the entrepreneurial space.
So, which is super interesting. I want to dive into the process that you guys went through in that. But, as you're, what I find interesting, Rob, is that so you have said that you've got this 18 to 24 month window before you get bored, or you're kind of on to the next project. And I don't know exactly how far you're into drip at this point, but some of those other possibilities were good ways to get your chips off the table completely and move on to the next page. I mean, so did you find like a different sort of investment emotionally with drip at this point to go past that 18 to 24 months?
I did. That's a good observation. I think we're at about 3 years by this time. And for me, my personal interest in the topic and the technology and just the business was waning for sure. But I had employees. I had a company that was used by, I don't even remember the number, but 1,000 maybe customers paying at the time. And a lot of them were people I knew personally. Because again, I have this personal brand in the entrepreneurial founder space, startup space. A lot of them were relying on Drip, and I kept thinking to myself, I can't just bail on it. You know what I'm saying? This is not just a little app that I'm going to sell the technology. Like, there are people relying on me, and so there were complex mix of emotions there.
Well, I think that's interesting too, because what you're feeling at that point where you got these people that are relying on your services to run their lives. And I think, some of the other people that we've interviewed or that have gone through acquisitions, really thinking about how your product and your service is going to continue, because it impacts the ripple effect, right, of how your customers rely on you. And then it also reflects on you. So if you would have just sold it to someone at Acquihire and then they just shut down Drip and you're literally letting 1,000 people down, how would that affect your happiness? Because I think even though you pull a bunch of money off the table, it could completely backfire. Exactly.
And that was, so I had a couple deal breakers going in. Number one, I did not want the product to get shut down for exactly the reason you said. Number two, I did not want any of my employees to get let go, because I'd built a really good team and there was no reason to do that. And so those were instant deal breakers going into to any acquisition. And I want to be clear, like I was not burned out, right? I mean, I was stressed and I was, tired and not super like jazzed every day, but we were still kicking ass. And so it wasn't like we had to sell, right? We were profitable, we were growing quickly, and it wasn't like I was pulling my hair out, but I knew that at some point I would be, and I didn't know how long. I didn't know if that'd be a year or 5 years until I would be. And so the concept or the idea of selling was a bit intriguing, but I'm also pretty measured and a pretty calculated person. I don't do impulsive things. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm just burned out and I got to just fire sale this thing. I looked out and thought, boy, if I even start talking to someone about funding, that's going to take 3 months to raise it. If I start talking to someone about an acquisition, it might take 6 to 12 months to complete. So let's play long ball here, and not get to the point where I am burned out and I just want to walk away from this thing. And that was my kind of measured thought process the whole time, is like, at least be smart about this and think over the long term.
Well, you're not forced into a corner. You're actually able to, as you're having from what I'm seeing, you're able to have conversations with these potential acquirers and having questions. You're asking questions that are important to you, and you're able to get the answers because you know what you're asking and why. Yep. And there was right before we jumped on, you were saying that you would, obviously with your coding background and the type of individual you are, you do a lot of self-research. Where were the places that you were going to educate yourself along what questions to ask? And so you did have eyes wide open as you were going down this route.
Yeah, I listened to, so I'm a big audiobook guy. You can obviously read these books, but I listened to them. I listened to Built to Sell by John Warlow. I had read that years ago, but I refreshed myself, listened to it 2 or 3 times. And then Finish Big by Bo Burlingham was one I listened to several times. A lot of that, it was funny how much of it, some of it applied to me. A lot of it didn't, because for me, so my legacy and my identity was not tied up in my business. And that's a big part of Finish Big. For me, I still have, I have a blog, I have 2 podcasts, I've written 3 books, I have a conference like that. That's more of me. And if those things went away, I would struggle. But the thought of like, oh no, I won't be working on Drip, next month, that wasn't super disappointing to me. Like I think Finish Big, focuses on.
Did that help? Because I was more in that camp where I was like, I was just kind of like, what the hell happened afterwards? Right. And did that help almost like therapeutically, like where, hey, I can go into this knowing that I can approach this from a rational perspective and practical perspective instead of, having the emotions to the side must have been a heck of a lot easier.
Absolutely. The stories that I've read and heard and the interviews, because I listened to a lot of Built to Sell radio during this time as well. And the emotions that I kept hearing, I thought, man, I'm really not in that particular boat. And so I can be a little more rational, although there were certainly some irrational moments, I will give myself, but it wasn't about, oh, what am I going to do next? It was always, about me getting angry at some negotiation or something. I was able to, detach myself while still keeping I had principles, right? It was like, we can't fire my people. We can't shut down my app. It was those kind of things, but it helped for sure.
Well, that's actually huge, right? You had, I want to actually highlight that because you had principles that were important, because I think what happens is a lot of the, negotiations gone south, or the people that aren't happy afterwards, they don't have these set of principles going in. So they don't know how to judge whether they've succeeded or not, because they have no map of how to guide themselves through the decisions.
That's right. Yeah. I had one other deal breaker I should mention, and it was that if we were going to sell, that I needed to walk away with enough money that I never had to work again. That was a deal breaker for me. So it was a non-starter if we weren't going to be talking in that range.
Got it. So let's maybe peel that back a little bit. So was it a lump sum or was it a cash flow? Because I think there's how you get to that dollar amount is a complicated situation, which we don't have to dive too much into. But you got all these taxes and all these different things. So did you have like a lump sum net proceeds dollar amount that you were going after, or
That's how I framed it. Yep. I'm into investing. I'm a left brain kind of guy. And so I went back and looked. I did a bunch of research of like, how much does it take to retire? Even though I'm not going to retire, but I want to know how to think about it. And there's a lot of research been done. There's a Trinity study that looked at the 4% rule. Yep. That if you take 4% of a portfolio, it can last you 30 years. And then they did a big study from, they started every year from like 1935 to, 2000 or something like that. Or I guess it's 1990. And almost all the years, I think there were 2 years where it wouldn't have lasted 30 years based on a 4% rule. But what they found was most of the endings, you wound up with more money at the end of the 30 years than you did when you started. And so there was a second study done that's like, boy, does the 4% rule actually apply perpetually, unless you have a run of bad luck early on? Could you literally, retire on 4% and with a decent amount of luck, just kind of have money to leave to your heirs. And they supported that in most cases. That's actually true. So I started thinking through that, and I actually backed I started saying, I'm a little more conservative than that. So 3.5% was the number I started looking at. And then I started thinking, well, how much money do I want, each year? And that was kind of a bare minimum of how I started thinking about it. And I said, if after taxes, after, a co-founder gets paid, after broker commission, kind of after everything, if I can walk away with this sum and have that much cash in the bank, in the market, in the assets that I manage, because I'm actually I'm decent at managing money and diversifying and that stuff. So I have confidence that I wasn't going to piss it away. That was it. That's how I calculated it. So then I had to work backwards from there, right? And say, obviously, there's probably going to be progress payments, and so it all has to kind of add up to that.
Again, it's a principle, and it's a rock that you're guiding the negotiations at. Which again, I remember part of our deal and a lot of other people that I have worked with, where they get so hung up on this gross dollar amount that you're going to be getting. It's like, oh, we were bought for this. I'm like, yeah, but what did they walk away with?
Yeah,
that's the important.
Exactly.
And then what kind of terms and conditions are they stuck with after the fact? So let's progress and going. Okay, so as you're going down the route with the Leadpages and Clay, and what were some hangups that you had, or what were the things that you really liked about the relationship building throughout the negotiations?
I struggled with that. I want to be honest. I had known Clay. He emailed me in mid 2015, and it took just almost a year. Maybe it was it was 13 months until the acquisition closed. But about 6 months of that was pretty hard negotiation. I struggled. A friend of mine had given me advice, and he said, every conversation from here on is part of the negotiation. And that was helpful, but it was also, for my personality, it was being very cautious. It was also probably wasn't great, because I was suspicious of everything, and probably to a way that I shouldn't have been. It made, in the end, everything worked out, and Clay and I are actually friends. We hang out and have breakfast and stuff. So like there was no blood, it was lost, and we did build a relationship, but I was probably a little too on guard, a little too much, and it stressed me out. I think I added stress to myself during that time, because I just was so concerned. I told my wife at one point, I could say something and lose $1 million off the purchase price, and she was like, "Is that true? Is that actually true, or are you just so wound up about it?" And the fact was, I was so wound up about it.
I think cautiously optimistic, and however way you want to word it. I think that feeling that you had is very real, and I totally have experienced it. And I've watched other people, but on the flip side, Rob, I've seen it happen. You know what I mean? And it's because you don't know the people across the table from you until you're actually married with them. And I've watched it, and so it's from what I just my 2 cents is that like. Because if you're an open, honest book, which I can tell you are, then it's internal conflict that you're dealing with, because you're protecting yourself, but you're also trying to be yourself. And so it's just this constant turmoil going on inside.
That's a really good way to describe it. It was turmoil, because I'm like by nature, like you said, I want to just tell the truth. I want to say, I want to put my cards on the table. And I also I like saying yes to people. Like that was one of the greatest things when I was a developer is people would say, hey, can we build this? And I'm like, yes, we can. I could totally kill that. So me saying no the whole time and resisting and like, that doesn't work. Well, why doesn't it work? And then defending that, I would just get riled up. Like I would hair on the back of my neck because it's like, well, now we're just arguing is what it felt. Even though, isn't that what negotiating is, you know?
Yeah. It's an interesting process. So how, I'm curious. So you go to the closing and you sign those documents and the money gets wired and everything's kind of complete. What was the emotions that you were feeling?
Well, I mean, there was a huge sense of relief when it finally came through, when the wire hit the bank account. I was actually at my oldest son's cello camp, and I was supposed to be in like helping them out. And they were like docs that hadn't been signed. And so I'm on my phone getting the email from Leadpages, and it's like, you have to sign these docs because we have to send the wire in the next 30 minutes. And so I was getting an evil eye stare from like other parents. And I was like, guys, seriously, you just have no idea what's going on right now. Like my life is changing as we speak, So it's completely surreal. And I'm like on my iPhone outside and I sign it. And then I went back in and then I get a text from Derek and it's a screenshot of the bank balance.
That's awesome.
And I was like, whoa. Yeah, it was, I got super choked up, right? Because it's such a journey. And then, but I also remember, I remember the stress not boiling away for probably, and it not feeling real for probably a good month or two after that.
How did the operations and how did everything change after that? What was kind of the arrangement for autonomy or like the integration with the companies and such?
Yeah, the cool part about Clay and the way everything was set up was he was super upfront about it. He said, we're not going to let any of your people go. We want to build on top of Drip and continue to have it be this great product. You guys are going to be, what you guys do today works, and so keep doing that. Like let's be more of an Instagram, Facebook acquisition where you're held at arm's length and you're just cranking away, and let us basically feed more customers into you. And it was that Clay lived up to everything that he said would happen in the deal, and that was super cool. I mean, we had you get 80-90% of it written down, but you can't write everything in a contract. It just doesn't work that way. And so there were some verbal things between he and I, and he lived up to every one of those, and hopefully I did as well.
That's awesome because one of the a lot of times people on the show or a lot of the Built to Sell radio interviews that you've probably heard where people will say that they don't get it into writing and everything changes afterwards. Yeah. So I think that's where the trust in the person that's buying you, but then also getting it down into writing and having that balance is super important.
I agree.
How did your roles or freedom or autonomy change afterwards? I mean, are you still able to do whatever you want or say yes to everything, or is it a little bit different?
For the most part, I am. I mean, my role became more focused, which was good. Like I gave up HR and payroll and, health insurance administration. And even I gave marketing to Leadpages because I was running that. And I gave support to the Leadpages team. And, just slowly, now I just focus on product. And so I was able to grow. We were 3 engineers when we got hired, and now we have 16. And I was able to really focus on just building the product faster, building it better with more resources. So it's been a net positive, not only the ability to take money off the table, but I have been less stressed over the past 18 months since the acquisition than the 18 months before that.
So do you have freedom, purpose, and relationships?
I do. Yeah, I do. I have the freedom. I have most of the freedom because I'm pretty, I'm a VP of product here. So it's not like I have to be here at 9 and clock out at 5 and that kind of stuff. The one thing I'd probably change is I might take more vacation. I might travel more, but we do have unlimited vacation. No one's ever given me crap about it. It's just my own internal thing of my team's here working. I struggle to do that as much as I used to. But overall, yeah, freedom's there. The purpose is still there because I'm working on Drip, right? And then my relationships are strong because I'm not stressed. And so I can spend time thinking about other people.
So, now you're going on probably 4-5 years since you started. So you're way past that 18-month gate that you were accustomed to. I mean, do you see the flame dimming at all, or is it something? I mean, is there something else on the horizon, or you still see enough runway in the industry and the product that you have?
Yeah, I don't have any ideas. I don't have a plan of what I would do next. because I don't actually think I want to do any more software products as much as I've enjoyed them. I turned 43 about a month ago, and I feel like I've accomplished what I wanted to with kind of B2B SaaS software, and that's my wheelhouse now. And I just don't feel like I want to do the grind of starting another one, So I obviously someday I'll move on to something, but I have 2 podcasts. I have a conference I throw 3 times a year. Sherry and I are publishing a book. I'm thinking about writing another. It's like I have other stuff. I don't need to start another business, and I don't necessarily like an actual, kind of what I say, grinded out software company. So I don't think I will ever do that again. But yeah, you're right. There will come a time where it'll be obvious, I think, when it's kind of time for me to move on to my next steps.
Well, it's interesting because of who your wife is, because I think what I see with a lot of entrepreneurs where they go through and the grind that you referred to, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, it's the start, it's the immediate feedback of creating something that's tangible. And there's tangible, whether it's the code or the financial reports, and you're able to see like how well you're doing. And a lot of these people move in after they've kind of hit the ball out of the park like you have. Yet all of a sudden now that challenge is a little bit more intrinsic. So, it's exactly what Sherry talks about all the time, right? Where, how do you challenge yourself in stuff that's not as measurable as all the stuff that you've done in the past?
Yep, that's exactly right.
So are you kind of doing that with the conferences and stuff? Because I know you're on the Zen Founder podcast. You're integrated in a lot of what Sherry does. I mean, do you see yourself kind of migrating into the more of that space, or is it more just kind of still in the journey search mode?
I would say I'm more in the journey search mode. I love helping Sherry out and kind of being a backstop and a sounding board for her. But, my wheelhouse is still kind of going in and mentally grinding stuff out on my own, I think. And that's where like building a book or writing a book or building I was building like just simple tools, hacking away last weekend. And that was super fun. And I don't know if it'll ever be a business, but I would love to spend 6 months, just not doing much, just only doing the podcast and everything, and then see what comes of that. Because in the past, something always does.
The universe calls and says, "Hey, that was a good idea," such as drip.
Yep, that's right. Yeah,
Rob, as we're kind of wrapping up here, with a couple of the journeys that you discussed with us and a lot of the things that we talked about, is there one thing that you'd either highlight for someone going through the journey, or something that you would leave us with?
I think one thing I did right and one thing I did poorly during the acquisition specifically is something I did right is I hired a really good team. I had a really good lawyer that I trusted. I had a really good CPA that I've had for years. So he was able to advise me on tax implications way early on. We were able to structure things in a way that made sense. And then I actually had a broker who was advising me and helping with negotiation. Without that, I would have been a complete basket case. So that was something I did right. Something I did wrong, and I wish I could do again, is, as I said, I stressed myself out more than I should have during the acquisition. I really struggled for about 6 months, and I can never get that time back. And I have regrets of how I potentially damaged relationships and just how I lived my life for that half a year.
Well, I think it's a fantastic advice, because it's tough hindsight bias is always 20/20, and that's what the whole purpose of getting people on that can share the wisdom like this. So I appreciate it so much, you coming on the show. If there's one way for our listeners to get in touch with you, what would it be?
It's to head to robwalling.com.
That's super easy. Thanks for coming on the show, Rob. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure.